drugs, or ideas, what you consume influences who you become. On the Mind and Matter podcast, we learn together from the best scientists and thinkers alive today about how your mind-body reacts to what you feed it. Before starting Mind and Matter, I spent 10 years in academia doing scientific research. I got a PhD in neuroscience where I focused on neuroendocrinology and the neurobiology of behavior, and before that, I specialized in molecular, developmental, and evolutionary genetics. I use my scientific background to help parse and translate the information that guests share on the podcast. In addition to the podcast, I write long-form written content inspired by the show where I integrate what I've learned across episodes. I also have a free weekly newsletter where I provide you with upcoming guests, share links, and provide commentary on scientific studies and research that I'm reading, and more. Visit mindandmatter.substack.com to find all of my content. The full version of this episode is available to paid subscribers at the Mind and Matter Substack at mindandmatter.substack.com. The full version is also freely available on my YouTube page. Just look up Mind and Matter or my name, Nick Jikomes, on YouTube, and you'll find the episode there. This is a partial version of the episode, and so it'll cut off partway through, but you'll still get a significant portion. So sign up to become a paid subscriber at Substack or visit my YouTube page to get the full episode. Hey everyone, I want to take just a minute to tell you about a really cool health monitoring device I've been using called Lumen. It's a handheld, pocket-sized device with a sleek design. The Lumen device measures CO2 levels in your breath, which allows their technology to determine the extent to which your body is burning fats versus carbohydrates. Lumen helps improve your metabolic flexibility, your body's efficiency in shifting between using fats and carbs for energy. I use this device in the morning or before bed or after meals or after workouts to track my metabolism. With just a couple weeks of use, I learned a lot about which foods were causing my body to burn mostly fat, mostly carbs, or both, as well as how long I needed to fast and how hard I needed to exercise to promote fat burning. Being able to track whether your body is burning fat versus carbs will help you figure out how your body responds to your lifestyle and whether or not your weight loss and fitness strategies are actually working. Lumen is great for anyone looking to optimize their health for either weight loss or athletic performance. Their easy-to-use app allows you to track your results together with what you're eating and how you're exercising, and it syncs with other devices like the Apple Watch. Click the link in the episode description to learn more and use the code MINDMATTER, MINDMATTER, to get 10% off your Lumen device today. That's on top of the site-wide sale they are currently running, and the Lumen device is eligible to be paid for with FSA and HSA health accounts. Check out the link in the episode description for more info. In person. No one's going to be able to see this because we're only doing audio, but I'm here at the Institute of Systems Biology with Dr. Hood. Can you just take a minute to tell everyone a little bit about who you are and where we're at right now?
I'm a scientist that has had now a 60-year career in science and really got started at Caltech in 1970 when I was a young assistant professor and deciding that my big problem that I wanted to attack in the future was human complexity. And in thinking about it in the 1970s, there were two issues to begin with that were really challenging. One was the issue of we didn't have the technologies to generate a lot of data. Mm-hmm. And a lot of data are really key to be able to dealing with complexity. And number two, if we generated all that data, we didn't have very good ways of thinking about how it could be used to decipher complexity. So my lab initially focused on molecular immunology, which was studying in the ultimate complexity in human biology. And it started developing technologies. And over the next 20 years, we developed 6 instruments that let us manipulate and synthesize and sequence proteins and genes. And one of these was the automated DNA sequencer. So from bringing engineering to biology, which we did in that first 20-year period, to actually getting involved in the Human Genome Project because of the first human automated DNA sequencer was a second paradigm change that was really I embraced fully. And I was a part of a committee in '85 that looked into the whole question of whether we should do the genome or not. And we ended up being split 6-6 on that question, where the 6 opposed to it were opposed because it was big science and would take the money away from small science and so forth. But in the end, it started in 1990 and, of course, was finished in 2003. And it gave us a framework, a really important framework for beginning to think about the source code of complexity in human organisms. And the next thing that happened is I really started thinking about how to deal effectively with the complexity of the data we were starting to generate. And that led to thinking about systems biology and about generating new technologies even more effectively, not by having a big lab that had all of the diversity of science you needed to generate technologies, but by creating a department to do so. And Caltech biology was absolutely against creating a new biology department. So Bill Gates made it possible in 1992 to me to move to the University of Washington and set up such a department. And it was really spectacularly successful. But in the end, I decided I wasn't moving systems biology and systems thinking fast enough. So in 2000, I created the Institute for Systems Biology with 2 other really terrific co-founders. And that really pioneered global holistic thinking about biology and about disease. And in the early 2000s, applying systems thinking to healthcare made me realize, one, that there was going to be a discipline of systems medicine, and 2, to think about what would be an ideal type of healthcare. And I decided at that time it should be P4, predictive, preventive, personalized, and participatory. We can talk later about what each of those mean.
So if I step back for a sec, you've had a long career, and basically, so you've been a part of the evolution of biology in terms of how it's conducted. So if we go back to the Human Genome Project, so I'm just a little boy at this time. So this is before my time in science. That was a big deal. It took many years to get that first human genome done, just one. Whereas today, you can give me my genome sequence and I don't know, probably by the end of the day at some tiny fraction of the cost. And so you were a big part of building some of the technologies that enabled all of this stuff to happen more rapidly and more cheaply. And a natural consequence of that technological progress is larger and more complex data sets. And we're at the Institute of Systems Biology. What is systems biology in terms of its relationship to these bigger, larger data sets that depend on these technological innovations? And I guess another way of saying that in simpler terms is, what is systems biology, and what, as opposed to like simpler or older forms of biology, how do those things differ exactly?
So I think the analogy is the analogy of a car. If you wanted to take a systems approach to understanding how a car worked, one, you would take the car apart and you'd get each of the individual parts. 2, you'd try to understand what that part did and what it was and how it was described. And then 3, you'd have to understand how the parts were all connected together to build a coherent object. And then 4, you'd need to understand the dynamics of how those parts could actually move the car and make predictions about what you could do with it. And the same is true in biology. If you want to understand Alzheimer's, we have to be able to understand a great deal about the complexity of the brain. But more than that, we have to understand the fundamental parts that deal with cognition, how they're interrelated, and what happens to them during the disease process, and raise questions about how we can prevent what actually happens, which is the destruction of neurons and the loss of the interactions that lead successively to the inability to speak and communicate and eventually even to think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so what are some of the things you guys are working on today here in terms of systems biology projects, just broadly speaking?
Well, the biggest projects we're working on now really started in 2013 and 14, where we took 108 individuals and we decided to analyze their genomes and their phenomes longitudinally, taking multiple samples of blood and so forth.
So genome is all the genes they have, phenome is all the proteins?
So the genome is basically
the whole
source code of DNA.
Yeah.
It's the sequence of the entire 23 pairs of human chromosomes and everything that encode the 20,000 or so genes, which are the molecular machines that actually execute many of the biological functions and so forth. So what systems biology attempts to understand is how those informational components work in conjunction with one another. So in a sense, the genome is the source code of life, and for a human, it specifies in general ways what exactly the human can potentially become, okay? But that potential is modulated by two things that arise from individual. One, their behavior, diet, exercise, sleep, all of those kind of things. And two, their environment. And these two things together probably constitute 90% of what determine how you change as you develop from birth to death. And that's called your phenotype. Mm-hmm. And the way we measure this changing phenotype is to look at the phenome, which we see in systems biology the blood being a window into health and disease because it bathes all the organs in your internal body, and we can capture molecules secreted by each of these organs and read out their behavior in various ways. Or we can look at your gut microbiome, the microbes that are present in your gut, through which your diet and your pills and everything else must filter to get into your blood.
So a phenome would be the set of all the phenotypes or traits that someone has. And for any given trait, that's going to be a function of a combination of your genotype, what's in your genome, and how that is being allowed or enabled to be expressed through environmental and behavioral interactions. So for example, if we measured, say, blood cholesterol in you or me, we would get some number for LDL. Our genetics have something to do with that, but also our diet and our sleep patterns and our life history are interacting with what's in our genome, and that's what gives us the phenotype that we would measure at any given time point in our life.
That's exactly right. So the phenome is essentially any feature in a human organism that changes over time. So the phenome can be measured by imaging. It can be measured by blood analytes. It can be measured by sequencing your gut microbiome to determine the ratio of number of species. And it can be determined by wearing wearables like Fitbits and Oura Rings that essentially measure your normal physiology, your exercise and sleep and so forth.
And so how does, thinking about the phenome, thinking about a systems biology approach, and all the data we have. So there's not only data that we can collect at a mass scale in laboratory environments like this, but as you just mentioned, wearables are very common. It's now quite easy for even an average person to collect quite a bit of data on themselves, from getting blood work done, from wearing an Oura Ring or whatever it may be. No connection to Oura Ring, by the way. We're just chatting off the cuff.
Yeah.
All of these things are giving us data. We're getting measurements of our phenome. How does sort of the systems biology approach and how we think about using this data, how does that start to get us thinking about medicine from the standpoint of prevention rather than diagnosing and fixing things after they go wrong.
Yeah. So the basic idea with this data-driven approach, where you have the genome and phenome measurements of individuals, is basically, one, we can look at the genome by itself and find that there are of the order of 8 different classifications of actionable possibilities where variants can lead to, if you have a particular kind of variant, you know exactly what to do to cure the ill it will cause. Okay? And these fall into a whole series of categories. There are 81 variants that have been designated by the American College of Medical Genetics that are actionable. And an example of this is there's a variant called malignant hypothermia. And this is a variant where if you take the wrong kind of anesthetic during a surgery, it can absolutely destroy your thermal control mechanism, and you heat irreversibly and it kills you. And so that's a very traumatic. If you have that gene, we know now which anesthetics you need to stay around. But knowing that you have it is key, or it'll kill you. So that's one category. There's a second category of variants that make it impossible for you to use certain drugs. And if your physician knows you have those variants, he can call for other drugs that will avoid that. And there's a third category of genes that are called polygenic features that are a collection of genes that give you a genetic risk for a variety of diseases and normal types of physiology. So, for example, there is a polygenic score, say for Alzheimer's, that says you have a very elevated risk if you have all of these variants, each of which contribute a very little piece to that whole score. And those variants actually tell us some of the machinery that causes Alzheimer's once they're analyzed. So anyway, the genome leads to a lot of actionable possibilities, but the phenome does too. And what we did, for example, in the first study, we looked at 108 people, is we took the 6 different types of data, the genome variants, and we actually had 5 phenome measurements. And so we could show there were statistical correlations at each time point in individuals that were really striking in their disposition. And these correlations of different kinds of features in the genome and phenome led us to the medical literature and to actionable possibilities that could actually either improve your wellness or let you avoid disease. And an example of one was with myself. I was incredibly low in vitamin D, and so I was prescribed to take 1,000 international units and start bringing it up.
I mean, you're fair-skinned. We're in Seattle.
But it didn't touch it. And it turned out I had 2 gene variants that blocked the uptake of vitamin D.
Oh, you're saying you took supplemental vitamin D, but it didn't move the needle for you.
At 1,000 international units, I needed to do 15,000 international units.
So if all you knew is that your vitamin D was low from a blood test and your doctor said, well, let's take the standard recommended dose for supplementation.
Nothing would have happened.
Nothing would have happened. And you wouldn't know that.
You wouldn't know that unless you did the test again. So it's putting these 2 things together led to an actionable possibility that could, and vitamin D level is important for a lot of different reasons. And in Seattle, there are a lot of people that have low vitamin Ds. And most of them with 1,000 international units can bring it right up to normal.
But some might be like you, and that's not enough.
But some are like me.
And by a factor of 10,
therefore,
perhaps.
you should know about your genome as well as your phenome.
Well, so this brings me to some interesting questions. So as fascinating as it would be to talk about the biology here, I want to talk about some of the practicalities. So you just mentioned a few things. So the hope here is I can get my genome sequenced, I can have phenome type data, I can have wearables, I can have all of this stuff, I can collect all of this data, but how do I get to actionable insights from that? Well, in theory, right, all of this stuff could be plugged into some master database, and then I could bring it to my doctor, and they could simply tell me what to do. So let's just, if I'm assuming I'm the average person, I don't have a PhD in biology, I don't know how to interpret all of this data myself, I need someone to do that for me. Ideally, that's going to be a physician that I see face to face. But there's a lot of data, a lot of complexity that gets really big, really fast here. And frankly, I'm not sure if I brought all of the biomarkers I could bring to a primary care doctor here in Seattle, would they even themselves be able to interpret it all for me and tell me what to do? How do we think about the implementation side of using all of this data to guide health when sort of the expertise required to dissect all of this phenome style systems biology data is so vast that even the average primary care physician might not themselves have the expertise to interpret it?
I would say 99% of the physicians out there wouldn't have the faintest idea how to interpret 95% of the data that you can bring them, okay? So how do we go about it? Well, I think this wraps up three interesting problems in this whole approach to data-driven health. So one problem is, how do we persuade people that this is a good way to move toward health? So it means you have to educate the people about what the genome is and about what the phenome is and why these things could be really powerful in assisting you. And, the ultimate objective we have of this is health of the individual. And the health can best be reflected in a significant expansion of your health span. So typically the health span of normal individuals goes into the 60s or so. And then after that, an awful lot of people decay very, very rapidly. Mm-hmm. We think with data-driven health that we're generating, we'll be able to take people into the 90s and have them absolutely mentally alert, physically capable, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So a really interesting question that comes up sociologically is, what are you going to do with the extra 20 years or so?
Yeah.
And how does that affect retirement? And how are you going to pay for, they're just a marvel of, but the really important point is data-driven health can absolutely optimize your wellness. And that's important for development, for education, for jobs, for creativity, for happiness, all of those. Health underlies all of those in a fundamental way, and it transforms individuals, and it can transform citizens in a country in the same way, because you have a lot of creative people that can go on and find. So health is really good. A, how do we educate them? And B, once we've educated them, what we did with a company called Aerovale, which was a scientific wellness company that used these techniques, was we had coaches. And a good coach could easily handle 500 patients or so. We ended up over a 4-year period recruiting about 5,000 people or so. And so we were able to improve their wellness and help them avoid disease in really striking ways.
So let's get a little more concrete with that. When you say a coach, are these physicians, or are they just people that are trained to interpret the data sets that you were using?
They are generally not physicians. They're people that usually came out of a background of nutrition or of some nursing and things like that, who are especially trained to be able to take the actionable possibilities. And Aerovale generated more than 200 of them and explained the relevant ones to individuals that needed to practice to those actionable possibilities. And I think the coaches were remarkably successful. But we think in the future, this is going to get into the millions and tens and hundreds of millions of people. And if you need a coach for every 1,000 individuals, coaches don't scale. So what we're beginning to study now is we've created a chatbot that has the ability. For example, we took a chatbot and had them, read the book I wrote on the age of scientific wellness in all its detail.
That's your book.
That's my book, and with Nathan Price. And then we had the chatbot look at all the lectures I had on out in the literature and everything like that. And so now this chatbot can answer any questions on data-driven health. At any level you want to ask the question, appropriate for a patient, appropriate for a physician, or appropriate for a data scientist.
So I want to tie a few things together there. So earlier you said, just given sort of the vastness of the data sets we're talking about that can be generated now, you said something like, the vast majority of physicians won't know how to interpret the vast majority of this data. That's not necessarily a knock on physicians themselves. It's just the complexity here. The biology is so complex and the data sets are so vast. Nobody can have total expertise in every domain. Nobody's going to be able to interpret every single piece of data. It's just not possible for a single human being to do that. But one thing that was implicit in what you just said is, we're developing AI systems now that can read the entire internet basically in a day, and they can be trained on different text sets of text to different levels of expertise. A lot of this stuff can be baked into chatbots. We know that already today some of these large language models are rivaling or even surpassing the diagnostic capabilities of human physicians that have been working for decades. What does this say about sort of the future of doctor-patient interactions and the role for human beings in the role of the physician? Are humans just going to get surpassed by AI given the vastness and the complexity of the data we're talking about?
No, not at all. I think the way to look at it is, in the future, physicians will be partners with AI, and that AI will be the enormous catalog that will give them at a finger's tip all of the expertise you need in all domains of medicine, so you can begin to think about treating your patients in ways no physician has ever been able to treat it before. So the physician is the grand integrator, and the chatbot or large language model transformer essentially supplies information, in the context of the actionable possibilities for a given patient in the context of their genome and their phenome at that time, and B, then provides the evidence that those actionable possibilities are medically valid, because physicians quite rightly want to be assured that they're reaching valid conclusions for their patients and everything. So I think the really important thing is for us to educate physicians now as to the enormous power of education in transforming how they can practice healthcare in the future.
Another thing I want to ask you about that I think is really interesting, and it's an interesting problem here. So I want to ask about the quality of the scientific literature, the protocols and the selection of literature we use in the training process of these AI models, in order to ensure that they are, that they're giving us good, robust, valid information that is actionable and is correct. So the challenge here is kind of interesting, because you might think, okay, if I train a large language model on all of the peer-reviewed work, all the peer-reviewed scientific publications in a given domain, it's now going to be like the super expert scientist in this field, and it's going to give me the best, most robust results. But of course, as you know, a lot of, just because something is published in a peer-reviewed journal doesn't mean it's good science. There's a lot of junk out there due to either, sloppiness of work, sometimes even fraud. There's been a lot of big controversies lately out there. And just to give one example of how this could quickly get really messy. So a field that I follow closely includes the work of John Speakman, who's a scientist who studies metabolism and diet. He just came out with a paper that basically quantified something that many of us have known already for years, which is that there's an entire field of study that's often called nutrition epidemiology, and it's based on these food frequency questionnaires where they just ask people to remember what they ate, in the past few days or weeks or months or even years. And all of the results are based on that data. And the data is basically garbage. You can argue about exactly how garbage it is, but these are not precise measurements. And basically it was just quantified how off a lot of these data sets are. But if I was a large language model guy, I could say, well, I want to create an AI doctor or AI nutritionist. I'm going to give it all of the nutrition epidemiology literature, peer-reviewed papers published by scientists at Harvard and Stanford and all of these big-name places with brand-name journals behind them. And yet, that training data would be largely bogus and give a lot of bad results. I'm just using that as an example. How do you think about how we train the AI systems on the literature, given that we can't just give it all of the literature because there's so much, there's a huge mixture of really good, really bad, and really mediocre science out there?
No. I think you have to be able to give them all literature and then give them the power to discriminate between good and bad science. And the power to do that is going to come from what are called knowledge graphs. And these are graphs of the entire span of biomedical information that have been annotated. And there are a couple of them that are one very large, Google, and one that's been annotated in enormous detail. And those are highly accurate standards that these large language models will ingest and compare everything it gets against those high-quality data, annotated networks, annotated communities of interaction, and so forth. So I think, and it's absolutely critical in the beginning that we make sure we deal with the possible, not only errors in data, which I think we can really deal with effectively, but the hallucination of the transformers as well. And I think with the combination of this highly annotated PubMed, we're easily going to be able to do that. It'll be a context. It'll be a baseline of reality and truth against which everything can be checked.
Yeah, it sounds like basically what you're saying is there are ways to set up training protocols such that even though you are giving the AI, quote, all of the data, you can also give it human-labeled subsets of the data that give it a sense of a standard by which it can compare all the rest of the things to something that a human is pre-specified as being rock solid. And this can be used in a way to ensure that these AI systems are generating robust results and they're not just sort of blindly giving equal weight to everything that we feed them.
Yeah, and in fact, what I could suggest to your listeners is that you read a book written recently by Henry Kissinger and Craig Munday called Genesis. And this is a description of the history of AI and how it's come about. It's an
Henry Kissinger, like the
Henry Kissinger. It was unfinished when he died, and Craig finished up the book. But it's a spectacular book because it tells you about the history. It gives you a clear idea of how powerful these things are going to be. And then it really talks about the sociology and ethics of how we deal with hallucinations and how we give the large language models a human soul so they can make appropriate kinds of judgments between good and bad, whatever it is. Okay? So, and one kind of thing that's been suggested is suppose along with everything else in science, you gave them the sociology and history of science and philosophy and ethics and a whole variety of other kinds of things like that. You could begin to give them the integrated human wisdom that could influence their view of the entire internet of data out there and so forth.
Yeah, so this would be large language models that aren't just trained on everything in PubMed, but they've also read Aristotle.
It's really a very interesting idea. Okay.
Interesting. I had no idea Henry Kissinger had been writing about that subject.
Oh, his last 2 books were really on AI. Yeah.
Interesting. So where do you think? I mean, there's a lot of places we can go with this. Where do you think AI is going to be going, broadly speaking, as it relates to science and medicine? And I don't just mean, I think basically I'd love if you could kind of just riff on what you just said. I think it's easy to imagine AI systems that are just narrowly trained on, diagnostic tasks or the scientific literature to do these sort of robotic or Spock-like, impersonal, dispassionate analyses and diagnostic tasks for humans. But what you're getting at is, we're probably going to see AIs that are not just trained to have scientific or medical expertise, but they are also trained in ways that give them what we might call a kind of human wisdom. And where do you see that going?
Well, I think they'll be trained in ways that have very deep knowledge. And I think the prediction is within a few years, we'll have large language models that far exceed the capacity of expert scientists to be able to deal with the scientific facts of their information. And probably both Microsoft, OpenAI, and Google now are generating the next generation of transformers. And I think even those people have no idea of just where they're going and what they're going to be able to do, except that they're going to far exceed the previous generation whose capacities we know at least a little bit about. So I think the potential for the future is very great in amassing knowledge and being able to gain new insights. But it also requires a careful formulation to keep it, in a sense, under control. And under control is defined very differently by different kinds of people and so forth. And that's what I think the book Genesis tried to get at, how we could give large language models a sense of responsibility with regard to our ethics and sociology.
And there's sort of lots of different views on how the whole AI thing could play out, generally speaking. You might even say there's new ideologies or potentially even new religions forming in this realm. So one of the more optimistic views is basically that, well, we're about to hit what some people call the singularity. AI is going to sort of integrate. There's going to be human-machine interfaces. We're basically going to integrate with artificial general intelligence. And effectively, we will all, or at least some of us, become totally immortalized and escape the limitations of human biology that humanity has historically been limited by. The more pessimistic view is that, we're basically going to just create an AI that gets rid of humanity because it decides that's what's best to do. Where in that spectrum of optimism to pessimism do you sit, and what do you think sort of the future of human mortality is going to look like?
Well, I think the responsibility we have as humans is to be able to educate these intelligences so they're in sync with our values and our philosophy and our way of looking at things. I mean, I think I think there are still interesting issues. It's one thing to have infinite knowledge and to be able to connect it all. Does that give you the ability to creatively jump a gap that has never been jumped before and make new fundamental realizations about things? Humans clearly have done that repeatedly out in the context of their scientific development. And I think this is whether these intelligences will be able to do that, I think, is an open question. But the most important part is we have to educate them in a proper way that is consistent with a partnership that is acceptable to us. That, I think, is very important. And we don't know exactly what that implies at this point in time.
Yeah, and I guess that's a big open question. That's also the scary thing.
Yeah,
we're sort of
absolutely.
I mean, if I sort of reflect what you say back to you and interpret it a little bit, on the one hand, two things are true simultaneously. We would probably all agree in some way, shape, or form that these things need to be trained in a very mindful fashion so that there's, what people call AI alignment, that the AI is going to stay aligned with humanity. Two problems there that immediately emerge. One, we don't actually know how to achieve that alignment. We're just, we're flying by the seat of our pants. We're just sort of hoping we achieve it, but no one, I don't think, really knows how to ensure that happens. And two is that when we say that we want the AI aligned with us, an implicit assumption there that I think is worth exploring is, who are we referring to when we say us? Because, we're all humans. Everyone shares one common humanity in the sense that we all belong to the same species. But, the entire history of humanity is a story of factions of humans competing against one another. And so, the question of how the AI is trained and who it is trained by is very important, because I don't think any one group knows exactly how this is going to play out. But also, if history is a guide at all, there's certainly no guarantee that whoever is at the helm of training these things is going to have all of humanity in mind rather than just a subset.
So I agree with everything you said there, basically. I think the most fundamental belief I have is once you let the genie out of the box, you're not going to put the genie back in the box. And so we have to deal with the genie that's out there. And all we can do is hope we deal with it in ways that are responsible according to our own ethics. Mm-hmm. And I admit there'll be very different groups that might have very different kinds of ethics. And that's a given that we have to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, in some sense that is just the naked truth. The genie is out of the bottle. And we're just going to have to deal with it, and different groups are going to have different thoughts, and we're going to just have to wait and see what happens.
I think it's like politics today. Yeah. I mean, many people have differing, divergent opinions on what's happened, but I think the really important thing for all of the sides in this political domain let's take the most optimistic opportunity. Let's take advantage of what circumstances have given us. Again, the genie's out of the box. We're not going to put it back and change anything, but let's do the best we can, each of us in our own ways, with what we're facing.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you some stuff about aging and longevity, but also just how we think about medicine and healing, broadly speaking. So, sort of underlying all of this is sort of your background in systems biology and all of the stuff that you're doing. And there's many ways we could take this. But, historically, if we just step back and take sort of a bird's eye view, there's been different sort of general approaches to human health and medicine. You might even call it different ideologies of medicine. One of them, and I'm sort of half making this up on the fly, so I'm using my own terminology here. It might conflict with what other people say, but this is me speaking. One view is what we might just call the traditional biomedical drug development view. Is you think of diseases as things that have gone wrong in the body, sort of like the way that you would think about something going wrong in your car. The car is this complex machine. The nuts and bolts get rusty over time. Things get loose. The radiator goes funky. Something overheats. And after it goes wrong, you have to go in and take something out or put something in. You have to fix individual pieces. So there's this sort of reductive approach to drug development that's been a big part of medicine the last several decades, right? You develop a single molecule that binds ideally to one receptor in one way that has one clear effect and a minimum of side effects. And that has its merits and its strengths and weaknesses, just like any other approach. Sort of another kind of approach that some people have is what we might call the holistic or healing approach. And I guess one of the basic ideas here would be, people with this mindset tend to think, well, our bodies are these evolved organic things. They are complex. They have a lot of built-in feedback mechanisms. The healing is sort of already known. The body knows how to heal itself, and if it's not fundamentally broken in its healing capacity and it has everything it needs, the body can be enabled to heal itself. For example, there are viewpoints by physicians and scientists going back quite a long ways that, perhaps we can think of cancer as a failure of the healing process itself. How do you, when you think about aging and longevity and how our health deteriorates over time, sort of how do you start to think about it at those high levels in terms of, is fixing something like aging or just disease generally, is it more a matter of waiting for things to go wrong and fixing specific problems, or is there a way in which we should think about these things as being a degradation of the body's own organic healing processes?
So I think that's really a terrific question. And the heart of it underlies the fatal flaw in contemporary medicine, which is almost entirely focused on disease and dealing with disease. And I would argue real health should do two things. One, it should be able to optimize wellness, to take individuals well beyond what they might be normally and make them far weller and age far more effectively. That's one aspect. And two, we should be able to diagnose most diseases, chronic diseases especially, early, so we can reverse them when they're simple and easy to change. Mm-hmm. That means we should never have chronic diseases. And the statistics are striking. In our $4.5 trillion healthcare bill today, 86% of our dollars are spent on chronic diseases. So if we really could deal with those, we could put enormous resources into the optimization of wellness and healthy aging. And I can talk to the whole idea of aging now. And for example, my nonprofit called Phenome Health is very interested in data-driven health of the type we've been talking about. Yep. Recently, we allied with the Buck Institute for Aging Research in Marin County. And the reason we did that is because scientific wellness, which is what the data-driven health is pushing, is one side of the coin of healthy aging, and the other side is what is called geroscience, the ability to look at each of the 12 hallmarks of aging and come to understand how we can use those insights to optimize the aging process. And the bringing and merging of these two things together, scientific wellness with geroscience, I think is really going to push us to where we can get the kind of health spans we've been talking about. And the focus will entirely be on optimizing wellness, on improving healthy aging, and avoiding chronic disease. A fundamentally different orientation than what we have in our $4.5 billion healthcare budget today. And of course, a really interesting sociologic question is, how are we going to make the transition?
Yeah, so to what extent do you think combating chronic disease is a matter of developing new drugs, treatments, and interventions versus avoiding the things that cause it and the things that avoiding the things in the environment that are creating it in the first place?
So I would say there are 3 different ways you can get to chronic diseases. One is you can have a fundamental flaw in your genetic material, and they're probably the only way we're going to easily cure it is through drugs. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that would be, and that's, so that definitely happens to a minority of people, but it does happen. And because it's an intrinsic thing, that's why you need an intervention of some kind.
Right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, what's number 2?
So number 2 is you can have defects and lead to chronic disease through your behavior. And diabetes is absolutely the classic example.
Yep.
Obesity is the classic example.
Yep.
And to a certain extent, neurodegenerative diseases can be an example.
Yeah.
And there, what we know is you can have profound impacts on these with changing life habits. And if you had to pick one life habit that I think is really fundamental to healthy aging, it's exercise.
Exercise.
I think it dominates in a really striking way. Sleep is important. Diet is important. Stress. Those are all things that we have to be able to deal with. But I think exercise really can trump in major ways a lot of these chronic kinds of issues. And then the third thing is the environment that can give the toxins. And it's known, for example, that black mold in houses where you live in certain people can induce absolutely classic Alzheimer's disease. If you move the people out of those toxic environments, it reverses.
Wow.
If you do it early enough.
If you do it early enough, yeah.
If you've lost neurons, then you're beyond.
Yeah.
But so it's things like that we're going to learn from data-driven health, and we'll be able to prevent all of those different kinds of things. And so going back to the genome again, there are really several different approaches to repairing a genetic defect. And for example, the gene that causes hypercholesterolemia. Mm-hmm. So one is drugs, and there is a drug that can deal with that very effectively. Not classic statins. You need a much more powerful drug. But a second is if we could actually, in the early embryos, genetically modify those genes to make them normal, and we have the gene engineering techniques to do it, although there's a long ways to go with all the technical details that are complexities arising from that.
But in principle,
but in the future, we're gonna be able to re-engineer things, so you won't have to worry about that. And I think a third thing is we may be able to generate new and much more effective drugs.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to talk about things like new and more effective drugs or therapies. So, as we briefly mentioned, when we say the word drug today, it's basically taken for granted that we're talking about a small molecule drug which has been specifically developed through the biopharmaceutical protocols that are in our society, and those have been engineered to try and have a lot of specificity. We tend to like to develop drugs that have one or a very small number of targets, right? They bind to one protein only, ideally, and the idea there is we want it to have a very specific narrow effect, and we want to minimize the side effects or any collateral damage that might happen. And that, there's a whole host of challenges and criticisms that can go with that approach. What do you think about sort of the traditional drug development approach as it has existed up until now in the U.S., and what are some of the new avenues being explored in sort of as alternatives to small molecule, high specificity drugs?
Okay, well, that is a very interesting question. So in my view, I can tell you one of the most spectacular failures in the pharmaceutical industry is developing drugs against amyloid for Alzheimer's. And over the last 12 years, there have been more than 500 clinical trials, $1 billion plus, and almost all of them have failed by most reasonable kinds of criteria. And the reason they've failed is because amyloid is almost certainly a result of, and not a cause of,
to what extent? So what was underlying that? Was that just a hopeful mistake where the drug companies were mistaking a consequence of a disease for a cause of a disease, or was there literature that was incorrectly, for some reason or another, pointing to that as the causal agent?
Well, I think clearly there was literature that tried to point to it as a causal agent, but I think it was a lemur-like mentality. It was a simple, easy explanation.
Full version of this episode is available to paid subscribers at the Mind and Matter Substack at mindandmatter.substack.com. The full version is also freely available on my YouTube page. Just look up Mind and Matter or my name, Nick Jikomis, on YouTube, and you'll find the episode there. This is a partial version of the episode, and so it'll cut off partway through, but you'll still get a significant portion. So sign up to become a paid subscriber at Substack or visit my YouTube page to get the full episode. This episode is supported in part by Athletic Greens. Their main product, AG1, is a comprehensive and convenient daily nutrition product containing 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients with less than 1 gram of sugar per serving, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything. It's gluten and dairy free and compatible with paleo, vegan, vegetarian, and ketogenic diets. AG1 is a quick and convenient way to supplement your diet to help ensure your body is getting the nutrients it needs. It comes in powder form, and you can mix it in water and drink it, or you can put it into a smoothie or a shake or something like that. I mix it into water and drink it, and it's super convenient. If you go to athleticgreens.com/mindandmatter, Athletic Greens will give you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Their vitamin D product comes in tincture form, so you just take 1 drop each day. A large fraction of the population is actually vitamin D deficient, especially in winter months when we get less sun exposure. And vitamin D is super important for the proper function of the immune system and for a variety of other things. So visit athleticgreens.com/mindandmatter or click the link in the episode description. You'll get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D with your first purchase.